Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Garrett Boyum, joined with Robert Fry.
And today we have on a well-known person in the strength and conditioning world, specifically with power development, in Bill Miller.
I'm super excited to have Bill on. I've been following Bill for quite a long time, and one of the things that makes Bill very unique is that he has both the capability to be in the weight room and on the skill side as well. So I really wanted to have Bill on to talk about how he trains athletes. And so today we explored a lot of stuff to do with strength and conditioning. And so we're going to have Bill back on because we didn't get much to the ecological or the motor learning and the skill acquisition stuff. But topics we did cover today were potentiation and how to prime the nervous system to be able to produce peak power right out of the gate. What does it look like to integrate strength and conditioning with the skill development, as well as fatigue, readiness, and workload management? And we also had Garrett Baker joined us on the call. So it was a full house. We also had some pitching stuff thrown in there in terms of how can we use what Javlin does to improve pitchers. So it was a great conversation that explored a whole bunch of different facets on the strength and conditioning side, as well as we just dipped our toes into the skill acquisition stuff at the end. And so we hope you guys enjoy our conversation today with Bill Miller.
Can't wait.
So I've just admired your work from afar. And you basically on the S&C side and even seemingly on the skill side have been doing a lot of the stuff that I've been super interested in. A lot of the mixing you from what I can see, you mix both the S&C and the skill side really well. I'd love to kind of hear kind of a little bit about your background and how you got into S&C and then your kind of current situation where you're able to actually walk both the line of strength and conditioning coach and skill coach.
Yeah, man, it's a super fortunate situation I'm in where I do have that gym that has both the weight room right next to the batting cages and everything like that. It's a great situation. But so I played baseball. I played in college. I tried the independent ball route. Didn't really work out. But I guess my big story in related to S&C is I was a big West Side barbell guy, and I was very big into like anything that I could improve in the weight room. And I remember looking around when I was playing with like the Joliet Slammers. Like I'm the biggest, strongest guy out here, but everybody out here throws faster than me, sprints faster than me, can hit balls farther than me even. And so I'm like, there's something missing in my training. And it like after a while, I'd talk with a lot of different people about like different ways to develop speed and mobility and stuff like that. But the one guy that I have to give a ton of credit to is Chris Beardsley of Strength and Conditioning Research. I joined his mentorship program around 4 years ago, I want to say. And since then, like a lot of the training I've done hasn't necessarily always been like high velocity stuff, but a lot of it has been about measuring high velocity output and making sure that whatever you're doing in training is always improving in those areas. So that was a big, big turnaround for me. Like I sort of like relied so much on heavy strength training for the longest time, and I got big and strong, but I wasn't the best baseball player. And so kind of peeling back that next layer where I am now, I remember there was a time about 5 years ago when I was training baseball players, I said the quote, I want to train the strongest baseball players in the country. I said that exact quote to somebody. And looking back on it, like, that's so stupid. Like, all I care about is training the best or making sure that the guys that I do train have the best possible seasons they can. So that's it. All I care about is that they become all conference or all American or all stars if they're in pro ball. That's it. And so like with that sort of mindset lately that I've had, I've really tried to make it a focal point that everybody gets in all of their sport specific work first. We're always working in the batting cages. We're always doing our throwing work. And then we go into our sprint work and our lifting and then everything else after that. But Yeah, to me, that's like I said, I'm in a fortunate situation. I only train about 25 to 30 athletes total. So I have a lot of like control over everyone's routines and everything like that. But yeah, it's to me, that's the best way that I feel I can do it for the athletes I train.
So one of the things that from a motor learning standpoint, we're a big believer in nonlinearity. So I'm going to jump back just a minute here, and I don't know if we've done proper introductions. I don't know if you've met everybody here yet. Yeah, I want to at least throw that out there. Have you met at least Robert, who I know is at least from your neck of the woods?
Mm-hmm.
So you're familiar with Robert. How about Garrett Baker?
Yeah,
Are you
we
familiar?
talked a little bit. So
okay, cool. I wanted to, make sure that we at least I gave an opportunity for that and didn't get over eager here and just like jump way forward. So, but yeah, do you guys have any, Robert or Garrett, have anything you want to jump in on first before I interject?
Garrett, I'll let you go. You look like you're chomping at the bit here. So
yeah, you look like you're chomping at the bit. I mean, I got something to say, but yeah, it looks like you got something more important to say.
Well, I don't know about that, but you might have something good too, Robert. You should go first then.
No, we'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Okay, all right.
Don't worry.
Well, I mean, because there's so much good stuff, Bill, that you said there, and part of this is the whole reason that I wanted to have you on too, is that there's just so many different avenues that you've touched on. So, for example, the myth of just get guys strong. I think when I was first coming up in S&C, and like that was the biggest thing, is like guys couldn't be strong enough, and it was all about get guys as strong as they can. And then I was in several different weight rooms, and I listened to the strength coach kind of talk, especially more about football players, and just talk about how like your best guys in the weight room aren't necessarily your best guys on the field. And so that for me, it didn't, like, because the voices on social media and like the coaches that I looked up to preach so much like strength, that I kind of like didn't really think that much of it until much later, when I started looking more into skill acquisition and how important that piece was, and also looking at transfer of training. And for me, like the whole reason that I got into strength and conditioning was I thought that was the missing piece for me. But I was also a really small kid at coming in as a freshman at 145 pounds, being 5'10", and then leaving college at like 155 pounds after 4 years of weightlifting. And so
yeah,
that for me, yes, probably a strength is an important piece, but it's also, to me, it been learning more about like, what does it mean to have specification in your training and also to have transfer of training. And the more that I dug into it, the more that I felt like there was still this huge gap between what we were doing in the weight room to getting it to transfer on the field as far as the skill stuff went.
Yeah, man. And I think where this sort of gets lost in translation is that, okay, if I have a group of 35 kids on a baseball team, and it's almost overwhelming to think, how can I get all 35 of these kids better in 1 hour today at the local college? You know what I mean? Like, so we only have so many resources, we only have so much time. And yes, so if everybody is on basically the same strength program, they're all going to get a little bit better. Like, that's fine. But like I said before, I'm in a super fortunate environment where it's like, okay, I can experiment as much as I want. I have as much leeway as possible. I have control over their entire training schedule. So it's not good enough to just say, okay, everybody, you got a little bit stronger this offseason. Great. It's, hey guys, you individual have to have a great season this year. That's what you come in here for. That's what you pay for. We are going to make that happen in any way that we can in training. So that's where I think a lot more of these avenues, as you talked about, for training transfer really come into play. Whereas I get it. If you're the local strength coach at, the Division III school down the street, you don't really have that type of control over everything. You don't quite have that the type of I guess the same situation that I'm in. So I have to say it like right off the bat. I'm very fortunate in the environment that I do have to work with athletes for all of this stuff. But yeah, man, I do think there is definitely like a myth out there like that you have to train with a bar on your back. You have to do all these heavy movements and stuff. And to be honest, you don't. Like, if let's say you had a guy that's trained for 6 years in the weight room, they're already pretty strong and everything like that. And let's say their deadlift is 520 pounds, their reverse lunge is 350, and all this great stuff. That's great. In order to make a dent in that type of an athlete, it could take a full year just to add 30, 40 pounds to their deadlift and the reverse lunge. It's like, man, that it's going to take so much time, so much energy, and it's going to take so much time away from what their low hanging fruit would be at that time. Like, that to me, their low hanging fruit is no longer strength training. It's everything else that you could fill their training bucket with. So if we know that strength training, deadlifts, and everything else is going to take a ton of time and energy, why would we spend all of that time on that little tiny 1% when we could be working more in the batting cage, more on throwing velocity, more on sprinting, more on everything else? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, especially as I got more down the rabbit hole of it, looking at, okay, how can I make this stuff be more sport specific and transfer, things and concepts that I'm sure you're familiar with of dynamic correspondence. There was some too that one of my mentors was talking about combination training, how to integrate skill stuff with weight room stuff. And that the last kind of place that I had kind of ended up, or one of the places that I've ended up is like PAP, potentiating the athlete before they go in, do their sport work. And so for me, one of the things that always intrigued me was like, how do we integrate strength and conditioning with the skill work? Because my background is in strength and conditioning has really changed the way that I look at training or practice design. And that influences how I write throwing programs, how I even structure a hitting session, all that sort of stuff. And so I'm kind of curious from your experience, where have you kind of, what have you come to and discovered as far as like your process and where you're currently at?
Yeah. And dude, you're really on like the forefront, I think, of everywhere that I think a lot of professional baseball coaches and players want to start going. I actually just talked with a coach named, his name's Pete from the Red Sox. And Pete was talking about how he had a guy in his minor league system that's doing like a bunch of like different drills, like lead arm, medicine ball throws and stuff like that. And how he uses that prior to his actual swings and batting practice to really like make sure that he's ready to go. He's got that potentiating effect. But for me, the way I like to structure it is I do those explosive exercises in that warm up setting, that potentiating warm up. So maybe it's medicine ball throws prior to an upper body strength training session, or sprint work and jumps and everything like that prior to a lower body strength training session. So you do all those, but I like to make sure you're tracking a number along with it, because now you can track fatigue as well. That's another thing Chris Beardsley's taught me, is that fatigue is probably going to hammer on high speed movements the most. So those high velocity exercises are probably going to be affected by fatigue the most. And if that's the case, then they're going to be great tests for fatigue and readiness prior to training. And so it works really, really well, just tracking someone's 15 or 20-yard dash. It works great for potentiation, but then you can also say, okay, I know you have to get to a 2.9 in this sprint before we start sprinting. Okay, hey, you got a 2.89 second right there. Let's get to your work, whether it's throwing or hitting, whatever it is that day.
Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Robert.
I was going to say, and to touch on it, I'm great. I'm glad you actually brought up potentiation, because I really liked your tweet from February 18th, where you talked about it's not just do this movement and then doing another faster movement. And then you talked about, doing those things that help you perform well. And yeah, so like what you mentioned about having that number behind it is just so crucial. And then going back to another one where you're talking about how it's better, rather than long distance running, doing sprints, repeating, and then getting those times and seeing, and having that video component behind it, where you have those times where you can monitor, hey, in this particular sprint, I am fatiguing here. In this particular sprint, so on and so forth. So asking you, how does, tracking those numbers help you in terms of future training?
Man, that's a great point. It's like, to me, it sets up everything. Like, we always obsess over like how many sets and reps should we be doing in this training session and stuff like that. And that's a hard question to answer, in my opinion, until you actually see how that guy's functioning that day. If they are, gassed by sprint number 4 in a session, and I see, man, these numbers suck, we're probably not going to do anything in the weight room that day. That would make any sense because their CNS is already pretty fried and everything like that. But if you have a kid who's just, every sprint they're getting better and better and better, it's like, okay, I know we have a great training session today. And then you can even take that same concept with velocity-based training in the weight room. If you have a bar speed sensor, you say the same thing. Okay, I know this guy dropped off by zero 0.2 meters per second in his training sessions last week. He was probably very gassed at the end of it. So now, like you said, that's going to set you up. Tomorrow is probably going to have to be an off day completely, because I know that his numbers are in the tank by the end of that session. So there is a lot that you can do with it. But to me, what's probably most important is just to track something when that kid walks in the door. I mean, we've even done like grip strength. Some guys like to do it. And that's probably another thing to touch on, is like, every body will probably respond to training a little different. So when it comes to like, what can you track for fatigue, you're going to kind of have to find that thing that the athlete can kind of rely on, that they like to test, that they will show the largest, increase or decrease in performance in if they are fatigued. So for example, it's interesting. One guy, we have this thing called the crane scale that you could just measure force with. And so we do like a pal-off hold sometimes, and we're just, pulling on that in a pal-off hold position. His goes in the tank if he's gassed. And that only happened maybe 3 or 4 times this offseason. But those days I'm like, okay, you're not going to hit today. We're just going to, do some light work and then head you home. But that's one that he loved to track. Another guy loved tracking grip strength. That's fine. But for the most part, I think a sprint or a jump or a medicine ball throw would be your best bet to see if that kid is set up to, perform at a high level in training.
So when you're tracking the fatigue, or just even readiness, what have you seen, and what's a significant enough drop off? Like, because generally speaking, when you introduce something new, you're going to see a little bit of downward trend in their performance, and that's kind of normal. So how do you determine when you're going to give them a complete off day? And then there's also the other element of, well, what is their season going to be like? And do I like, how far out are we? And then when does it make sense to give a guy a complete off day, or when does he actually have to work through it and get his body accustomed to that amount of frequency of training or physical activity?
Man, that's another tough one. I would say, okay, so we have that situation where the guy walks in the gym. Let's say we're doing a medicine ball overhead throw for the radar gun with a 3-pound ball, something light. I know he can throw it fast, and he should be getting 38 miles an hour. He's only getting like 35, 36. So, okay, maybe we'll go do some medicine ball slams. Maybe we'll go pull on the crane scale for a couple sets, just 2 or 3 sets. All right, now let's come back, give you a few minutes, come back and see what your numbers are looking like. Normally, if that kid isn't really gassed from previous session, they should be able to jump right in and get 38s again. Like they should be functioning at a high level, but sometimes that's not the case. So like after giving them that second go round of maybe 5 reps or so, after that, I would shut it if they're not really showing that their numbers are where they should be. But then as far as like complete off days go, that's a tough one because there's going to be so many different variables, man. Like even if you have a kid in college, they might be getting up at 6 a.m. for practices tomorrow, maybe even earlier. They might have, midterms coming up and all this other stuff. So to me, it's like, take as many days as you need and prove to me that you are ready to train today. Like training is only going to be impactful if the kid is ready to let it rip, absolutely give everything that he can and function at a high rate. If they can't do it, I don't know anything that I can put them through in the weight room that would really be impactful for their power development. There are other things like, mobility, isometrics, and maybe, different things that you can do for arm care and tissue health, and those types of things are fine. But as far as like true power development type things, and I probably wouldn't have them do anything if they're not functioning well, because you can't tap into all the motor units that you need, and you can't tap into it fast enough for it to produce any adaptations.
So then for you, would you say that your primary focus on the S&C side is power development for baseball players?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for 100%.
Because I mean, that for me, that was a shift. It's not strength. Like, to me, it's power development. Can you express strength quickly?
Yeah.
And yeah, at some level, I mean, strength coaches always come back with, well, strength is the foundation for power. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but if you don't end up converting that strength to power and actually training that, you're leaving a lot left on the table as far as your ability to utilize the strength that you've actually developed.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things where I was at a Division I school, and a strength coach there before was just really big on strength, and he hadn't done any like high velocity stuff with them other than Olympic lifting. And most of the stuff was like 75% or above. And I did some isometric stuff with them and like some speed deadlifts and maybe a French contrast. And this kid felt like he was flying out there in the fall. And it's like, because the other strength coach had left so much untapped potential just sitting on the table. Like, it only took 2 sessions with him before he felt like he was the fastest he's ever been in his life.
Now, the argument when because I've said very similar things before, the argument that I get is, well, because we did all the Olympic lifting and squatting and everything else, that set him up for 2 sessions and he's ready to go. It doesn't always work like that with everybody, man. Like, shit, I wish that it worked like that for me. But yeah, I mean, there's so much that goes into it. And the other thing about like training at higher speeds, training at higher velocities, what I feel it really does for athletes is it exposes you to the speeds that you're going to find in your sport. And so now when you talk about, hey, you have to go from a batter's box and sprint 90 feet, go, do it. You can turn it on and it's nothing. It feels second nature to you. It doesn't feel like you're doing something different. Okay, hey, you have to sprint. Oh, you got to throw on the brakes and get back real quick. Okay, I can do that. I did that in my training for 3, 4, 5 months. Or hey, you got to jump up and then you got to rotate fast once you hit the ground and throw this kid out. Okay, I'm prepared to handle those types of speeds. And certainly, like, there's a lot of strength exercises that can help keep you safe on the field. No doubt about it. Eric Cressy has made an unbelievable living proving that. But at the same time, it's like, if a guy isn't moving well at high speeds, they're not coordinated at high speeds, if they haven't been exposed to high speeds in their training, I feel like you're leaving a ton on the table from an injury prevention standpoint too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because one of the things that I look at it more strength and conditioning, oftentimes I'm looking at it from the standpoint of, am I preparing the tissues in the body to be able to handle and withstand the forces that I'm going to ask of them when it comes to most often practice, actually, more so than the games, because oftentimes practice is way more intense than games. I wish I had actual baseball data, but I've seen football data, and that was definitely true of like their spring or their like preseason sessions were way higher than their game sessions, and you would actually see injury rates where it would be really high at the beginning of practice, the start of fall practice, or spring practice, or whatever it is in football. And when they actually took the data and showed it to the coaches and they adjusted it, the number of injuries came way down. And it just made me think of my first year coaching at junior college, and we came out for our first day of practice in the dome, and we did a full infield, and how many guys' arms were just super sore after that first team practice. And it was like, maybe we need to adjust how we do things, and that our guys weren't actually prepared for what we were asking of them. And that really changed my thinking on how we actually prepare guys. Like, it, because, especially with, to me, junior college, high school, etc., guys don't really know what they need to be doing to prepare themselves for practice. Like they don't think about these things. And so I look at it as it's our job as coaches to actually make sure they're prepared for what we're asking them to do. Because if they come in and they get hurt, then especially if they're one of our top guys, then we basically shot ourselves in the foot there and put them behind. And so to me, having these basic understandings of just basic strength and conditioning principles of building work capacity is, to me, one of the things that at least I see as being very beneficial to having strength and conditioning. And that's where I look at, so for example, you were talking about for hitters and rotational power. For me, one thing that I've changed a little bit on is not that I don't think that like throwing med balls is bad, but I don't think that it prepares the tissue as well as doing something like plate rotations, or like how you have like a dumbbell. Because if we think about it, when you throw a med ball, you don't have to decelerate any of that force that you created. So you can generate a high amount of force, get going fast, but you don't then have to absorb that force. Whereas if you're holding a plate and you rotate it as fast as you can, then you actually have to do something to dissipate it. And when we think about hitting, we don't let go of the bat. If you swing the bat as hard as you can, all the different sort of joints and whatnot and tissues have to then absorb all that force that you created. And so, at least to me, from an oblique standpoint, I think doing those plate rotations, even at high velocity, working back and forth, all of a sudden now you're actually challenging the tissues. You're building that capacity to actually allow guys to actually have a higher work capacity to take more high volume, high intent swings. Because I think when I was looking at some of the potentiation research, they were saying that early on, you weren't seeing an actual result to the potentiation with the isometric stuff because the athlete was fatiguing. So they weren't getting that PAP effect. But after, 4 weeks or however many weeks, then they weren't fatiguing anymore and they were actually able to take advantage of that potentiation effect. And so to me, it just kind of points to the fact that the body needs to actually be trained to handle what we're asking it to do. And so to your point of fatigue earlier, guys we should be paying attention to the amount of volume that our guys are taking in practice. Because if we actually want to develop the skill, they need to be fresher in order to develop it. And if we start getting into like 50, 100 reps, how quality are they at that point when the tissues are now become way more fatigued if you actually haven't built up that capacity beforehand?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, because now you're talking the exact same way that I think, which is you want to get guys strong to handle their sport. That's what matters. We want to get guys strong to be more explosive in their sport. Those are the only two things that we can really work on, in my opinion, in the strength and conditioning community. And there's so many things that fall outside of the squat rack that would prepare athletes to do that. Yeah, like you said, I do a lot of like dumbbell, like a rapid rotational and stop. I like those rapid torso decel drills. I have to admit, I very fortunate again. Like I'm in the situation I'm in. I have that Proteus machine, and the thing about the Proteus that really like caught me, obviously, like they gave me a great price and stuff, but the thing that caught my attention was that you can do that exercise and track how fast you were able to go back and forth and how quickly you could stop it on a dime and stuff like that. So that's probably one of the main exercises that I wanted to do on the Proteus. And so we do it a ton right now, but you don't need a $15,000 machine to do that. You can take a 20-pound dumbbell and get the same training effect. But like everything else, I like trying to put a number on it. So, I spent 15 grand on getting numbers.
All in the power research. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, no, those are some great points. The one thing I wanted to ask, to touch on what Garrett was saying earlier, what you were saying now, Bill, was, with kind of guys trying to be fresher and trying to teach this, how do you treat rest? How do you value a rest period? do some guys need more rest? Do some guys need less rest? Do you go about seeing a way to quantify that, or do you go about a way of seeing, hey, how can we allow guys to rest when they need to rest?
Yeah, man, that's a tough one too, because it's probably going to vary between every kid. So I had, see, the pro ball guys that I had this off season, like they had the best schedules. I think they came in 5, sometimes 6 days a week. And now, granted, they're coming in every day, and we're tracking fatigue, so not every day was going to be a high intensity session. But I knew I was going to see them every day. But then some of the high school and college kids, I only got to see them like 3, maybe 4 times a week at most. So this is where it gets tough, because if you have a kid who's paying you money to train and he's gassed, and it's like, shit, dude, you only came in twice this week. Like, you're paying me money for X number of training sessions this month. I think I've only had to do it once, where I told a kid, hey, like, we are going to go through our full training session today. We're going to keep it super light. And like, I gave him some stuff that he could do at home the next day, if he was feeling a little bit fresher. But yeah, that's where I think it gets so tough, if especially if you're working with a team setting, because all those kids are coming in at the same time. They have no like other choice. They have to come in when it's their time slot. So in those situations, man, I can see it being very tough and very not easy to just tell a kid, hey, you're not squatting today, you're not deadlifting today. But in a perfect world, yeah, you should probably not be doing that. And as far as like what should you be doing on those rest days, like some people are in the mindset of like active recovery days. I'm not. I hate them. To me, like, I tried doing them for the longest time, where I knew I was gassed and I knew I was supposed to be doing something. So I'm going to go through these different drills and these breathing exercises. And to me, just like being on my feet and the mindset of like, I'm doing this training session that it lasts me 45 minutes or so, or an hour, that just the almost like the mental capacity to go through that was fatiguing, as weird as it sounds. But yeah, to me, that was more detrimental than not. To me, the best things that you could be doing on your off days are getting off of your feet, and then maybe at most like going through like mobility or deep end range isometrics is something I'm a big fan of. Like those types of movements would be like, that would be where I would cap it.
Well, okay. So on the isometrics, like, how do you feel about those? Because to me, especially if you're going end range and depending upon the intensity, that's to me that's very taxing on the central nervous system. And so, I mean, I've seen guys, post about doing isometrics every day, even when they're fatigued, like long duration, max intensity, and they just rode out their down phase,
Yeah.
and then their body adapted, recovered. Because, well, this is another this is a little another tangent that I think is related, but like, are you familiar with Bondarchuk's system?
Not really, no.
Okay. Because I looked into it and I found it to be super interesting, partially because, the whole premise of his stuff is transfer of training, at least as I understood it. But his big thing was not wave loading volume and intensity, and just keeping that consistent for a training phase. And it made sense in the sense that it allowed the system in the body to actually adapt to that stimulus and get the greatest adaptation out of it. So like if you do the same thing day in and day out, your body's going to adapt to it, even if at the beginning you absolutely get crushed by it. The system will eventually be able to catch up, because not a lot is changing in terms of the volume and intensity, generally speaking. And so I just wonder if that was kind of maybe the reason why they were able to ride it out, because they were just doing 5-minute ISOs, and the session was pretty much the same every single day. And then eventually the body just super compensated, and they were able to actually have a benefit from that.
Yeah, to me, I always cap like max effort isometrics. I usually cap them at about 4 to 5 seconds. That's it. Yeah, man, I've done like the long duration, high intensity ISOs. Those things are crazy. But
Yeah.
what's weird about them is you definitely feel that central fatigue, but I never really felt like the next day, at least peripherally fatigued. I never really felt soreness. And that was an interesting thing. And I'll be 100% honest, I have no clue what is going on there, because everything that I've read in research shows that none of this shit should be working. It's like maybe you'll see some tendon stiffness gains, maybe you'll see some muscle fascicle length gains, but to me, there's just not much research out there on it. So I've talked to Chris Beardsley about it at length, and he's always like, I got nothing for you, Bill. I'm sorry. There's just nothing written about them. So, but they are interesting. And like you said, you do have to watch it with those. Like when it's a recovery day, man, take off. Like do something else. We're human beings. We're not robots. So as much as we want to make it our job to be great baseball players or whatever, it like you will be a better baseball player if you are a better human being first, if you are exposed to a lot of different things in your life and that you're enjoying life. Because if your life is miserable, it will impact your baseball performance a ton, especially because baseball is such a mentally grueling game as it is. So to me, on those off days, man, like let yourself be off. That's to me the best way to do it.
Absolutely. Those are some great points, Bill. Another thing I wanted to touch on was in terms of, not just off days, but like the balance between off season versus in season. How does training vary in your world when it's off season versus in season?
That's another tough one. Something that I've been wrestling with in my head lately, especially because this is the time of year that this is a big problem. I don't really care to put a bar on a kid's back anymore. Like there's some athletes where I think they just love doing the reverse lunge. That's fine. We're going to do it all off season. But the more off seasons and then in seasons that I've been through, the more I've started to notice, like when we really try to keep that reverse lunge 3-rep max high in season, the less and less it really works. Like it's just, so I usually try to take the bar off of kids' backs now. We did it last season and it seemed to work pretty well, and I'm planning on doing it again. But other than that, I guess as far as like volume and exercise selection is concerned, I'll definitely cut down the volume because there's no real point in trying to push for more power adaptations. Like doing 10 sets of jumps probably isn't necessary in the in season, but it might be necessary in the off season in order to improve power output. So maybe I would cap it at like half of that, maybe 5 or 6 sets of 3 jumps. And then as far as like just in general exercise selection, I would probably push for a little bit more load in those high velocity movements, because I know like one of the first things to go when I track like force velocity profiles with guys, like so heavy load, medium load, and light load, different things. Usually the thing that goes in season first is the force end of that, like force velocity profile. So I try to do more stuff with like a 5 or 6 pound medicine ball, or lightly loaded medicine or dumbbell jumps, and maybe even like work with some resistant sprinting, stuff like that. I've noticed has been beneficial. Let's see what else.
So I just wanted to ask a quick question on that.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the force side, are you talking like, for example, speed strength or strength speed there, like on the continuum? What are you meaning by the force side? Are you talking max strength? It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like you're talking more like speed strength or strength speed there.
Yeah, it's more like speed strength, I guess, is where it would fall on the spectrum. So the way I do a force velocity profile, I guess I should have said that is, so I'll do like a 12-pound medicine ball throw, an 8-pound, and a 4-pound ball throw. And each one sort of represents a different side of the force velocity spectrum. So if you're really bad at that 12-pound ball, but you're great at the 4-pound ball, yeah, we'll do a lot more force production work. And if we do touch a medicine ball, it will be a slightly heavier medicine ball for you. Whereas like the opposite is like me, where I'm great with that heavier ball, but I suck with the light one. So I'm going to do a lot of high velocity work in my training. It's a super simple way that I've found works in my brain. But yeah, like, so by and large, a lot of times guys will lose like that sort of like the speed strength, like a fast movement that's slightly loaded seems to work really well in season. But the more I've thought about it, as I'd mentioned, I've been wrestling with this concept, and it's like the comment that I always get is, well, they're already getting all their reps in their practices and in their games, and it's like, well, are they? Are they really getting the same rep, the same quality of rep that they were in the off season? Where it's like, okay, I know if we track your bat speeds, I know they're all above 70 in all your training reps. There's so many times in season, and this is fine because guys are trying to figure out how to hit real pitching. But there's so many times in season where those bat speeds drop, where throwing velocities drop, where we're just not putting the same stress on the body as we were before. So over time, bat speeds and velocities begin to fall, I feel like, because of that. So there does have to be a component, at the very least, track something over the course of the season to make sure that you're not losing that high velocity end of the equation. So it's a very tough thing, but again, it would always roll back to what I would be doing in that warm up, where it's like, okay, we're going to track a high velocity movement, and I know where your numbers have to be in order for you to train today. And then if your numbers are looking good and they're where they should be, I can track that over the course of the whole season and make sure that you're maintaining those levels of power development at a like a high velocity. So that's, I guess, like the main thing that I would say. If you're tracking where you gained all off season, then you should be able to maintain your power development as well. But I guess then the last thing is like, how do you fit in that sort of the injury prevention stuff? And I think, Garrett, you were talking about it before about how it's a lot of like tissue preparation type stuff. And so maybe instead of working with a ton of high velocity, rapid torso deceleration drills, maybe we can slow it down a little bit, but still expose those tissues to something that is stressful enough to adapt to it. And that's where I think like some eccentrics might work really well. Isometrics can do a pretty good job there as well. You have to monitor your fatigue though, but I do think that those could be good movements to add more of in season in, a volume that would make sense for the athlete.
Well, for me, the way that what you described, the whole reason why I think you need to add a little bit of load is that at some level during the midpoint of the season, your system has gotten adapted to whatever the volume and intensity that you're doing stuff at. And then you actually start a level of detraining because now the stimulus, like the system has adapted to it. It's no longer responding to it. And to me, when you add that load in again of like a little bit of weight, now you're creating a training stimulus. And that again helps with your proprioceptive field. To me, this is like thinking about the training residuals and like how long do you hold on to certain training residuals and what do you need to do to actually keep those up. And I think it to me, it's the basic principle that you kind of touched on of adaptation. So have you adapted to this, or are you maladapted to it, or are you starting to detrain? And so we need to actually add some sort of stimulus to actually cause some growth. And like things like eccentrics, isometrics, these are different ways to actually stimulate the system to create and to drive a new adaptation. Because that's where for me, I think guys should be swinging weighted bats a little bit too in season, simply to add that stimulus to allow the bat, because eventually the bat may feel like just like any old thing. And then maybe it starts to feel heavy. But if you continually or consistently introduce a weighted bat in there, then hopefully it feels like you're always able to manipulate your game bat and be able to feel like that you can swing that thing super fast. And so to me, that's why I think, something like what you're describing on the hitting side or even on the baseball side. And this is why guys, I think, especially bullpen guys, but just any pitcher likes throwing with weighted balls a little bit as part of their warm up. Because it does give you that effect. And I guess I would be curious your take on this too, of how that helps with your proprioception and your feel when you do stuff like that.
Yeah, man. I was just thinking about how brilliant that idea is of just like I feel an implement that is a little bit heavier than what I'm used to. I'm working against it. I know how to produce force against it. That's proprioception. I know how to produce force within the confines of this movement. So yeah, that to me that's a genius idea. Um, the problem is in baseball, it's like shit. The higher the level you go, the more advanced with these concepts you want to get, but then the more resistance you come across. And it's like nobody wants to touch a damn weighted ball in season unless that's what they're comfortable with. So I guess at the end of the day, it's like if you have a guy who's very comfortable with experimenting or very comfortable with just in general, like a weighted bat implement, like there's a lot of guys that you find in pro baseball or even in college that I don't want to touch those driveline bats, man. They fuck up my swing, bro. It's like okay, like then I guess we won't touch those bats. Because at the end of the day, they have to perform well, and I do think that there is something to that concept of like when the bat feels light in your hands, you have a lot of confidence up at the plate. So I guess whatever training you needed to do to create that type of confidence would be extremely valuable. It could just be something as similar as, hey, make sure your grip strength is high. Like add in a couple things of grip over the course of the week. Make sure you keep that. It could be something that simple, but it could be something like you had mentioned, a little bit more advanced with like a slightly weighted implement, because to me, that's how I would approach it, but you're going to come across a lot of resistance, that's for sure.
Well, and two, one of the things that I heard talking with a coach from Avila was he had used some of the command balls with his guys, and it worked well for the guys that didn't have command. But the guys that did have command, it messed them up, which to me makes sense when I started thinking about it more. And it sounds similar to what you're describing there with like using a weighted ball or a weighted bat, and guys saying that no, this stuff messes up my swing, because this kind of is a good segue into the motor learning stuff. Because you have this idea of attunement, guys being highly sensitive to their implements, and when you are attuned, using something that is a little bit heavier or lighter, you're really sensitive to that, and then that actually makes you less sensitive to your game implement. Whereas guys who don't have the sensitivity to their game implement may actually benefit from using something a little bit heavier, something a little bit lighter, because then it makes it more salient or obvious to them what is unique, and they have more sensitivity to their actual game implement.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important piece with this of like, to your point, we should be individualizing all this stuff. But one of the things that you were saying about how people find this stuff to be way too advanced, it's like these concepts though are so incredibly simple. Like we're just talking about adaptation, and understanding basic things of like the said principle, specific adaptation to impose demands. I might have screwed up the S, but there's that one. I'm trying to think. There's progressive overload. Like these are like really, really simple ideas and concepts. And it's, I don't know, in some ways it's like, if we can just even run with some of these very simple ideas, like for example, the capacity thing that I took from functional range conditioning, and Dr. Andrea Ospina, like if the demand or the load exceeds the capacity, then you're going to get injured. Like it's kind of a simple thing, but if your capacity exceeds the load or the demand, you have injury prevention. And so to me, these are like very basic concepts that I try to boil things back to and ask the question of like, okay, what is going to be asked of this athlete? Like, I want to know how many throws my middle infielder or my two-way middle infielder, who is also a pitcher, like how many throws does he have in a season? Well, then my on-ramp, he needs to throw that much, or I need to have him throw more than what he's going to throw once he gets into practice, so that we don't have any issues as far as, arm soreness and all that sort of stuff, or going on the DL because his shoulder hurts.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's a great point. And I guess as far as like off-season versus in-season concerns go, like I never want any athlete I train to walk into their season and like feel like it's a huge spike in workload. Like it should feel the same. That's at best it should feel like this is easy to go through. You know what I mean? I guess where things get muddy is when teams start to do a lot of like extra conditioning type stuff. Dude, even at the pro level, I've had two guys now head out to spring training. Both of them had to do some sort of like a crazy conditioning test. Like one of them had to do a 5-lap test around the field. The other one had to do like a 300-yard shuttle at the beginning and end of practice that day. And it's just like, oh my God, like I don't know if I have the will to start conditioning guys for that. But other than those things, like, but even then, like those guys, I think they're so well adapted to training in general, just training at high intensities that they kind of bounce back pretty quick. You know, they didn't do great in those tests necessarily, but they were able to, you know, come back fine the next day and, you know, they're playing baseball. Whereas somebody who is just, you know, kind of has done a little bit of strength training and some mobility and nothing else, they haven't been running at all. Like they haven't been sprinting or anything. They probably would go and do a test like that and be absolutely torched for 3 or 4 days after that. That would be my take at least. But, yeah.
And to kind of build off that too, what Garrett was mentioning earlier and what Bill was mentioning earlier, Bill was talking about how pro ball guys are more, you know, in a sense, adaptable or understanding kind of these concepts. Whereas Garrett says, you know, the high school guys, the JUCO players really don't know what's going on being, you know, around a weight room. What can we do, you know, in the education world to tell these high school, junior college guys, hey, here's what we need to work on. Is there some way that that's possible so those guys can have a better understanding, one, and then two, in the literal sense, like the players want to be able to do these types of things. Can we do something to promote that?
Yeah.
At
so
the
I
younger
think what
levels?
Garrett just did like a couple minutes ago was great. How he was able to say like, yes, these concepts might sound advanced, and but in reality they're very simple. This is, you know, like this is injury prevention. You can handle the loads of your sport, and so I think having those types of conversations a lot with athletes sort of makes it known to them like these are your end goals. You can handle the demands of your sport, or you're more powerful for your sport. We're trying to hammer one of those two things with this exercise right now. But I think too, when it comes to like sort of getting stuff to fit with athletes, I have found the best thing is, hey, how'd you like that exercise? Like that super simple question is probably going to get you more information than anything that we could talk about here today. Hey, how'd you like that? Okay, cool. You liked it? We're going to keep doing that. You know, like maybe we'll do it at this point during the week, or maybe we'll do it 3, 4, 5 times a week. And then, you know, obviously always talking about like the end goal with the movement. This is where I think you can be in 3, 4 months. This is where I think you should be by the end of the off season, stuff like that. I think that's another concept, like that just sort of sparks something in my mind that doesn't get talked about enough. The concept of progressive overload. And, you know, most people understand it as just put more weight on the bar, but there's so many more things. Like something I've seen a lot of lately that I like a lot is I've started to see some people who take, I think they have like a 45-pound bar on their back, or maybe they're holding it like Zercher style, and they rotate back and forth and they can stop that bar in a dime. And I'm like, man, that's crazy. I think I might have saw like Trevor Bauer doing it or something. I'm like, that's nuts. Like, let me try that. And I tried doing it and I could not stop the bar to save my life. And so I'm like, holy shit, like progressive overload with that exercise is not necessarily I can hold a 45-pound bar and do the exercise. It's that I can stop that bar in a dime. So, you know, like when we do these movements, it's not just about do the same load at the same speed. I want to increase the speed. I want to increase my ability to control that load in that deceleration phase. There's so many ways that we should be trying to progress athletes with. And I think that starts with a conversation of this is what we're doing today. I'm glad you like this exercise, but this is where I want you to be in 3, 4 months.
And I think that's super important. The other thing that for me when it comes to progressive overload. And I go back to Bondarchuk kind of really highlighted it for me. And then just looking back at other things that, say, for example, I read from Brett Contreras and some of his work, was that the way that you can create the adaptation, and to me, one of the safer ways to create the adaptation with progressive overload is to potentially just keep the volume and the load the same. Like, to me, there's you greatly reduce the risk of injury, because I think a lot of people think progressive overload is exactly how you stated it, Bill, of like each week you're adding more weight to the bar. And sometimes the system can't, like those jumps, especially if you add 5 pounds every week, or 10 pounds, putting a 5 on either side, eventually that jump, when it was like a 5% increase, as it gets closer to your 1 RM, like that becomes like a really, really huge increase.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that, because early on it was like, oh yeah, I can make these big jumps. And then all of a sudden the thing gets really heavy, and now you're at greater risk of injury because you're not actually prepared for that, and your body isn't. And that's where, for me, thinking about progressive overload in terms of adaptation, like, and two, this goes to what I read with Brett Contreras, of him talking about powerlifters and some who had set world records not lifting above 75% 1 RM. And to me, that just felt so anti everything that I've heard, in a way of like, oh, strength matters, and so you need to lift heavy all the time. And to me, 75% is not, it's not light, but it's not super heavy either. To me, anything 80 or above is considered heavy. And so that was just really interesting to me, that, oh, you can actually increase strength working submaximally. And I think that conversation isn't always had as much, or like recognized, when we're talking about how to progress somebody and improve their power output or their strength.
Yeah, no doubt. And so for me, I do a lot of velocity-based training work. And so a lot of it is, I want the speed at this load to be here at the end of the off season. That's one of the conversations we like to have. But yeah, man, I think that's an unbelievably important concept. There's so many kids and so I see it in Javlin a lot. I only train a few Javlin throwers, but the one thing that a lot of them will say is, oh yeah, this guy, he threw 70 meters 3 years ago as a freshman, and now he's a senior and he still throws 70. Like, he hasn't surpassed it. He's mid 60s now or something like that. And there's so many kids now thinking about it with baseball, that they enter, college throwing 85. Great. That's a good velo to be at as a freshman. If you gained literally a mile per hour per year, you're knocking on the door to like indie ball or something like that. But so many kids just they peter out. They don't really produce adaptations from their training, and they don't really continue that climb. And rightfully so. Not everybody wants to play professionally. I get it, but man, like there's a lot of adaptations to be had out there that are beyond just what you'll find in the squat rack.
Bill, now that you brought up Javlin, being the lone throwing guy here, I was really curious on this. Is there anything that you've picked up from like the Javlin world that like kind of opened your eyes to help you train in the baseball world? I was super curious of that, seeing that you've kind of dipped into you started in the baseball, right? You've kind of dipped into Javlin. I was super curious if you've seen anything that's helped you in the baseball world.
Probably the first thing that like comes to mind is just in general using KPIs. Like in Javlin, for the longest time, like, obviously America, we suck, but, like Eastern Europeans and Germans, they've been throwing medicine balls for distance, or like a rock or something. They've been throwing shit for distance, and they do a lot of jumping tests. And I think that they'll do like some sprinting tests as well. But like, there's so many people who do training that, in my opinion, I would never program the shit that they do. But at the end of the day, they're finding ways to improve output in those types of exercises, where they can chuck a med ball farther, or they can sprint faster, or jump more effectively over hurdles or something like that. So they're testing things. And I remember learning that from Scott, the one Javlin thrower I train. I'm like, that's such a genius idea. I don't know why nobody's doing this in baseball. And there are people, and there have been people who have been doing it for a long time, obviously, but that concept was never very popular to me. But another interesting one that I've gotten into a lot over the years is training eccentrics with the rear shoulders. Just like that. In general, being able to handle that decelerative force, eccentric overload exercises, and eccentric strength in general is really, really helpful, I think. And I kind of learned that through Javlin, in general, seeing their training and stuff like that. But then there's some other stuff that I might not necessarily agree with, like they're huge on pullovers over there in Germany, and we do pullovers as well, but they do them. I feel like if you ever watch Johannes Vetter do a pullover, you'll see what I mean. It's like, all right, bro, like you don't have to do that necessarily, that exact same exercise. But there is some wacky shit out there, but I do think they have a lot of concepts that are pretty interesting. And probably one more that sticks out to me is the guy who just won this year, Neeraj Chopra. He does like this medicine ball throw where he contorts his body way back, and he's standing, and he can touch the ground behind him with the med ball and throw this damn thing like 60 feet. And I tried doing it the other day because I watched a video of him doing it. He started it from a kneeling position, and he could get the ball back to the ground. I put a bucket that was maybe like a tall baseball bucket, and I put it right behind me, and I did it kneeling, and I could not touch the bucket, the top of the bucket. So I still have like 2.5 feet to get to the ground. But I'm just like, that is incredible. And it's something that's like, if my spine and my whole body was free to move the way that his is, and to be forceful through that full range of motion, maybe I would be a pretty good thrower too. So there is some concepts there that I think are really, really important. Like Neeraj's training sucks. I'll be honest. It's just like he takes these 15-pound weights and just lunges and stuff like that. But if you ever dig into some of his stuff on YouTube, maybe some of the stuff he doesn't post about on Instagram or whatever, but there is some very cool stuff that he does. Like he's able to get over like these 4-foot hurdles, and it looks like he's a bunny rabbit. Like that's incredible. That's one of the main things I think a lot of throwers here don't do a lot of that the ability to be a bouncy plyometric mover. So yeah, I guess that those would be the main concepts that I think would be impactful for throwers here.
No. So why are you less enthused about the pullovers? Because me looking into Javlin, that seems to be a staple, and to the way that they really get their whole body into the pullover, and they don't. To me, it doesn't look like they get to full end range. It's, you know what I mean? It looks like they're doing like a half bicep curl. You know, you watch guys doing curls, and they're not getting all the way to end range.
Yeah, to me, I love utilizing the stretch shortening cycle and like getting some bounce. But I'm much more of a fan of it when we're actually moving pretty fast. I feel that if I got, 3 plates and I'm just trying to like bounce this thing back up, I feel that that's more damaging for the stretch shortening cycle than it is if I was doing it with a light load, where I could actually get out and release that thing. And I think there is a decent amount of research on that concept for jumping, where you had guys who were jumping with like super heavy weights, and it wasn't really helpful for their ability to jump in comparison to band assisted jumping, which really helped them become more bouncy. So that's an interesting concept there. But I don't know. I feel like the pullover is a good exercise, and we do it a lot, but we'll do it with like the deepest range that we can get to and drive out of it super fast. That's the way that I like to do it. So we'll hook up the bar speed sensor for that one. I'm not a fan of the way he does it, where he has like a spotter like lifting it for him out of the bottom, and he's just kind of like bouncing the weight up and down. Like it's fine, it's working for him. Go ahead, keep doing it. But I feel that we've been doing a more effective way of doing pullovers with the guys that we've been training. That's my take, at least.
So then what's your take on the 2 biggest exercises for, I guess, or maybe underutilized exercises for guys throwing hard? Because to me, I would say, as far as I understand it, you got pullovers and bench. Like those 2, I think, for your big primary movers have, as I understand how they connect to the humerus, or, or integrated around it. Like those are kind of maybe your two big primary movers.
Yeah. I mean, those are fine. Obviously, those are good. But I would probably say you'd want to do something faster. Like I would say a medicine ball chest pass for distance would probably be even better. Just because there's so much variance in how much like pec strength really matters versus pec speed. You have to have fast pecs. And the problem is the lats are such a ginormous muscle. If you ever look in any sort of research on them, like they're not going to have a lot of those fast like type 2X fibers and stuff like that. So they're always going to be this big donkey of a muscle. So I guess it's fine to train them with a lot more strength, but I would still make sure you're training them with a high velocity movement in some capacity, just to make sure that those tissues are ready to stretch really fast and then rebound back really, really fast. So like I like to do like a supine throw where we reach back behind the head and chuck the shit out of the ball. And I'll tell guys like, hey, I want you to literally reach back and reverse this thing back as fast as you possibly can. But yeah, I guess those are two really good ones. But the one that I would add in for sure is something for the rear shoulder. Like I think that's where a lot of people like, oh man, my bench went up this month. Okay, cool. Yeah, are you rowing more? Are you stronger in an eccentric in any capacity? Probably not, because you haven't been training that shit. So I think like in some capacity you should be training for the deceleration aspect of a throw as well, whether it's with a high speed movement, something like a rapid catch type movement, or if it's something that's actually eccentric overloaded, that's fine too.
What's your take on in a way I want to say triphasic, but I mean to me it's kind of the principles of triphasic. I don't know if you're familiar with any Calculus's stuff.
Not too much, to be honest. I know the concepts and I think they're fine. Like I think, but the way that I approach eccentric training is not so much about just slowly lowering a weight. To me, at least at some point beyond a novice level, that it has to be an eccentric overload or at least very close to it.
So what are you delineating there when you say eccentric overload versus just slowly lowering the weight? Because at least as I understand triphasic, his extreme version is you're going 120%
yes,
of your 1RM, and this is where it gets to me like extremely crazy. You don't just do that for the eccentric, you do that for the isometric too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I'm like, okay, that's way different. Like,
yeah,
and
you produce very different adaptations when you start to train like that too. But yeah, I would say, like, from what I've always understood, triphasic is, at least what I've seen people doing online, is like, oh, I have like maybe 70% of my squat 1 rep max, and I'm slowly lowering it down. Like the one kid I trained who was at Iowa State, that's what they did all the damn time, and I'm just like, dude, you've had a bar on your back now for probably a total of 15 minutes today. Like if you accumulated all the sets and of all the time, and I'm just like, do we really need to have a bar on your back for that long today? And then you got to go and throw tomorrow? Like that's probably not the smartest idea, but there are some exercises that I feel like could work well in that type of a scenario maybe. But yeah, to me, there's the way that makes the most sense in my head when looking at the kinetic sequences. You have these spots that have to accelerate, spots that have to be super explosive, and then spots that have to decelerate and be able to stabilize on a dime. And so when breaking it down like that, I would say, yeah, I probably wouldn't care so much about squatting so much as maybe doing like an extreme, like we do reverse Nordics a lot, where I'm actually pushing on the athlete all the way down. And we'll do Nordics as well. Nordics are fine, but after a while, you have to find a way to increase the load there too. So, but yeah, those are two that I would say would be better than doing an eccentric squat, in my opinion.
Yeah, no. The other thing that I touch on too is, for me, like the posterior strength of the rotator cuff. Because I think you can do rows, and I think there's some benefit of doing a heavy eccentric row, but I just don't know if it works the throwing tissue as much. Like I know some guys do get sore in their trap and the rhomboids, like back in their scap there. That is a common trigger point. But I almost wonder though that more, at least for someone like myself who has struggled with with shoulder injuries, like to me, it's my cuff and my rotator cuff, and doing heavy eccentric stuff for my cuff specifically, I think is highly important. But being the fact that it's oftentimes injured, like it doesn't take that much to overload it. And so where I go is I really like manual resisted stuff, whether it's isometric or eccentric. And I actually think it's the best or done the best when it's actually you doing the input yourself, because you can take yourself right to that threshold and the feedback is immediate for you. Whereas having done manual stuff for other guys, I've also or seen other guys do manual stuff to other people. It's like you have to be really careful as soon as you start getting to end range, because like guys drop off super fast, and you all of a sudden just throw a ton of force in there when a guy is like at the end range and into rotation, and you're gonna really hurt somebody's shoulder. And so to me, that end range is actually really important to train. And the best person who's going to be able to take you right to the threshold is yourself.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I've never really thought about that. But yeah, it definitely, like if you are using, like, so I do that with my athletes. It takes a lot of feel, that's for sure. It probably takes at least a couple sessions to where you really start to get that hang of it with each other. But yeah, either way though, I'm gonna have to get to walking my dog soon in a couple minutes.
Fair enough.
Anything off the top of your guys' heads right now before we head out?
No, I mean, I didn't even get to any of the EcoD stuff. I mean, because like the thing that impresses me the most is like what you're doing with your hitters, like the fact that you're throwing live to hitters, all that sort of stuff. And I mean, whether you realize it or not, like that from a motor learning standpoint, and the philosophy or the framework that I come from an ecological or from a motor learning side of things, and it being an ecological approach, like that is very ecological. And part of having you on is to actually get into some of that. But we got bogged down in the weeds a little bit with the S&C stuff.
I do actually want to touch on about like live hitting and stuff like that. So when it comes to those live at bats, like I feel that probably one of the most important things for a hitter is being comfortable in the box. Like that concept of comfortability, that concept of familiarity with the environment of a ball being thrown from an arm at you. Like it shouldn't feel like anything was weird is happening when you step in the batter's box. So yes, it's not necessarily the same as facing a real pitcher, but the one thing I will say I'm super, super proud of is every hitter that I train, when they went into like their first live at bats of the year, where like pitchers were throwing to them and stuff like that indoors, it was always like every single guy like looked super comfortable up there, whether they got a good base hit or a double or anything or not. They looked like they were not overmatched up at the plate, and that's a super important concept to me, that when it comes to motor learning, like you have to get guys to base level first. You have to get them to the point where it's like, I know what this environment is. I know how to handle the expectations of it, whether it's fast reaction time or movement left and right. Like I know I can do it. I can handle it. Okay, now it's time to keep learning. Now it's time to keep progressing. But if that kid is uncomfortable in the batter's box to start with, you've already lost. They won't learn a damn thing. And so it takes, in my opinion, a lot of those short box live at bats sometimes for guys to consistently feel that way.
How long is, or how many short box sessions or at bats or rounds do your guys get before they go into their season?
Jed, a lot. Let's see. So I did count it with the one kid. He had, I think, 440 at bats is what we kind of approximated over the course of the whole off season against me. So every time.
What was the time frame there then?
It was 4 months. Yeah, it was about 100, a little over 100 each month there. So yeah, and so every time we would go about once a week, and we get about 25 at bats. And so yeah, that was. Yeah, it was a lot of work with that one kid, but I would say just about everybody's getting at least a couple hundred. And I've noticed it's extremely beneficial for like the younger kids too, because for the older guys, I don't throw hard enough to where it's really challenging to them. So we move the plate up really quick and we do funky stuff. But with the younger kids, like I train a freshman in high school, this is the exact same pitching that he's facing. It's like mid 70s and it's kind of straight. Sometimes it moves, sometimes it doesn't. And he has just been dicking on the ball like this offseason now. So I'm really happy about that. But yeah, I mean, just like think about it like this. If you're an alien who crash landed on Earth and you're just going to study baseball players and look at the things that, what do all great baseball players do? Like, what are the common factors? And like, obviously they rotate fast and they can handle all these demands of their sport and stuff like that we talked about. But probably the one thing that they've all done a lot of is that they've played the game of baseball more than everybody else. Like Justin Verlander probably has thrown more pitches than anybody on the planet, like, or very close to it, or like Ichiro Suzuki has probably accumulated more at bats in his life than anybody, ever. So it's like these young Dominican kids that are coming in and, turn the world on fire and stuff like that. Like, they've played baseball a lot at a high level since they were like 14 years old. Like, they've seen fast pitching, they've seen crazy good, players and what the expectation is and stuff like that. So talk about comfortability. They're comfortable with that environment because that's what they've been in, but they've also done it a lot. And that, I think, matters too.
I couldn't agree more.
I love it.
Baker, you got anything you want to add in?
Yeah, I was curious. So, I mean, you could go maybe with some of the funky stuff you're talking about, but I saw you had like a 3-part series on adjustability and hitting. And anytime I see a guy in the S&C world talk about that, I find it really fascinating. So is there anything, I guess, one, it could be the funky stuff you're talking about, or two, like anything you may be doing more on the weight roomy side that's increasing that? So I haven't seen these series, so I don't know necessarily what's in them.
No.
But is there anything you're doing?
Yeah, you won't find too much about the S&C side in there other than kind of like a concept that we talked about earlier about like bat speed. Actually, for the one guy that I interviewed, it was huge for him. Like, he needs high bat speed in order to feel adjustable up at the plate, because he feels that if he doesn't have that bat speed, he can't let his best swing rip. And he can't, basically, like what he talks about, he likes to be able to do is have the confidence to hook an outside pitch and hit it out to his pull side. And which is funny because it's the exact opposite comment of what another guy I interviewed talked about with adjustability. Like, he's like, I need to take that pitch and oppo approach it. That's fine too. But probably the biggest thing that I came to the conclusion of with adjustability is have confidence in your approach. If you do that and you obviously like match plane of pitch for a long time and you're coming through fast, if you do those two things, you're probably going to be pretty damn good. But the moment that doubt starts to creep in, whatever your approach is, whether it's stay inside the ball or pull everything or whatever it is, if you doubt your approach, shit's going to go bad for you like real quick. And both of them talked about that. Like, if I'm not comfortable with what I'm doing up at the box, it's not going to go well. So that's the main concept of the series. So
I think that's really cool. I think that's one thing we're seeing with our hitters right now is that they are sometimes going to the dish and weren't challenged enough in the cages at times to have that comfortability that you're kind of talking about. And it's just maybe easier rounds, or maybe you're doing some funky stuff, challenging the capabilities of the swing, but they're not actually being challenged in any form of game-like setting, not picking up the information like you're providing. Like, you're providing a really rich information-rich environment for your guys. So like I 100% applaud you for that. And when I saw adjustability and hitting and a guy from the S&C side, I was stoked. Like, I think that's really cool. You don't see that very common. Yeah. I don't think that's often something you come by. That's cool.
Well, all right. Well, I think I gotta go take the dog out. She's in the crate right now. She's been in the crate.
Oh no. Yeah, you definitely should go get her and take her for a walk. I'm sure she wants to get out and move around.
Yeah, for sure. I'll get her a treat too.
But to kind of wrap, are there any couple of things, any resources that you would recommend? And they don't have to be baseball related or strength and conditioning related.
I guess I'll pub my books. I have 2 books, Throw Fast and Swing Fast. I want to write a book about sprinting as well called Sprint Fast, but it's like got to find time to write again. COVID was great because I could write whenever I wanted, basically. But now things get busy again. So I'll start learning stuff about sprinting maybe in the next few years. I'll maybe sit down and write a book if I have time.
Sounds good. And then where can people find you if they want to connect with you and all that sort of thing?
On Instagram, Bill Miller Training, and on Twitter at Bill Mills. I answer DMs all the time. Like, as long as it's not a bot or someone trying to sell me cryptocurrency or something, I will answer. So I'll do my best to help with training in any way I can, and understand that, like, and I know you guys get this, but I think a lot of people on social media don't. Like, they see my persona as this like super serious guy, like it's all nuts and bolts with training, and it's like, no, it ain't about that. I'm super open. I'm always down to be wrong. Like, I'm fine with it. Shit, I learned stuff from you today, and it's just like, that's what it's about. It's not about trying to be right today. It's about trying to be right tomorrow. Try to be better and try to learn a lot. And so, yeah, anytime anybody has comments or wants to tell me I suck or whatever, have at it. I'll be down to talk. So.
Sweet. Well, we appreciate that. As far as like that, I have the same kind of mentality of always try to learn from everybody. And even sometimes your greatest critics can actually be, you can learn something from them if you can get past the ad hominem attacks that come with that. And so, yeah, appreciate you taking the time to come chat with us.
For sure, guys. Have a great night, and I'll talk to you all very soon.
Talk to you soon, Bill. It was great talking to you. Let me be the first to say that you were great, not terrible. All right.
All right. Sounds great, guys. I'll talk to you